The city had a way of swallowing the light, especially when it rained. On this particular evening, the sky wasn't just gray, it was a deep, bruised purple, and it had been crying great, heavy tears for hours. The streets of the city gleamed like black mirrors, reflecting the blurry red and white lights of the endless stream of cars. People hurried along the sidewalks, their umbrellas creating a chaotic, bobbing canopy as they rushed towards warm, dry homes and waiting families. One person, however, was not rushing home. She was simply rushing, and it seemed like everything was working against her. Her name was Serena, and she was having a truly terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. It had started with her ancient alarm clock failing to ring, which made her late for her shift at the flower shop, Blissful Blooms. Then, a whole bucket of water had been knocked over, creating a huge, slippery mess that took forever to clean. And now, as her final punishment, the heavens had opened up just as she was about to lock the shop door and leave. She didn't have an umbrella. She never did. It was one of those things she always meant to buy but somehow never got around to. So, she did the only thing she could do. She pulled the collar of her thin coat up around her ears, clutched her bag tightly to her chest and made a run for it. The bus stop was only 3 blocks away, but in this downpour, it felt like 3 miles. Her shoes, which were not at all meant for running, were instantly soaked and a cold, squelching feeling settled between her toes. Her hair, which she had carefully pinned up that morning, was now a wet, dark mess, plastered to her head and neck. By the time she reached the bus stop, she was shivering, a full-body, uncontrollable shake that made her teeth chatter. She stood under the narrow shelter, but the wind blew the rain in sideways, so she was getting just as wet as if she were standing in the open. She waited and waited. After 15 long, cold minutes, a bus finally rumbled into view, its headlights cutting through the gloomy twilight. But it didn't stop. It simply drove right past her, its out-of-service sign glowing like a cruel joke. Serena's shoulders slumped. A wave of pure misery washed over her. This was it. This was the peak of her awful day. Desperate, she decided to try for a taxi. She stepped out to the curb, her arm held high, her hand waving pathetically. Dozens of yellow cabs sped by, but every single one had its little rooftop light off, meaning they were already occupied. They zoomed past, each one sending a spray of dirty, cold water up onto the sidewalk, forcing her to jump back each time. She was beginning to feel invisible, a soggy ghost on the side of the road. Just as she was about to give up and accept her fate of a long, wet, miserable walk home, a sleek, impossibly long and very black car pulled up to the curb a few feet ahead of her. It was the kind of car that didn't just drive, it glided, silent and powerful like a shark moving through dark water. It was so fancy and out of place in her neighborhood that she thought it must be for someone important. She took a step back, not wanting to be in the way. But then, the dark window of the back passenger side slid down without a sound. A man's face appeared, silhouetted against the soft, warm light from inside the car. She couldn't see his features clearly, but she could feel him looking at her. "You look like you're trying to swim to your destination," a deep voice said. It wasn't a laugh, it was a simple, dry observation. Serena, too cold and tired to be properly embarrassed, just nodded, water dripping from the tip of her nose. "I can't get a taxi," she said, her voice trembling from the cold. The man was silent for a moment as if considering a complex problem. "Where do you need to go?" he asked. Serena named the street, a street he probably had never heard of, in a part of the city people like him usually avoided. He paused again, then seemed to come to a decision. "Get in," he said. "I'll take you." Every stranger danger lesson she had ever learned screamed in her head. But the shivering of her body was louder. The promise of warmth and a dry ride home was too powerful to ignore. She hesitated for only a second before hurrying forward. The door opened from the inside, and a wave of delicious, dry heat enveloped her. She practically fell into the soft leather seat, her wet clothes making a slight squelching sound as she landed. The door closed with a solid, expensive-sounding thud, and suddenly, the roar of the rain in the city was gone, replaced by a profound, almost eerie silence. The car began to move so smoothly she could barely feel it. She finally dared to look at the man sitting across from her. He wasn't looking out the window. He was looking directly at her. And in the soft interior light, she could see him properly. He had sharp, serious features with dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything. He was handsome, but in a way that felt a little intimidating, like a statue in a museum you weren't allowed to touch. This was Kane. "You're very trusting," Kane said, his voice low. "Getting into a car with a stranger." Serena wiped a droplet of water from her cheek. "It was either trust you or catch pneumonia," she replied, trying to sound brave, though her chattering teeth ruined the effect. And you have a very nice car. It seems like a lot of trouble to go through to kidnap someone. You'd probably get the seats all wet. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. It was there and gone in a flash. He reached into a small compartment and pulled out a thick, soft towel, handing it to her. It was pure white and smelled faintly of clean linen. Serena took it gratefully, burying her face in its fluffy warmth before using it to dry her hair and hands. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled by the towel. "Really? Thank you so much. I was starting to think I'd have to live at that bus stop forever." They drove in silence for a few minutes. Serena looked out the window, watching the city blur past. From in here, the rain looked beautiful, painting the world in soft, watery smears of light. It felt like they were in their own little bubble, safe and separate from the storm. "My name is Serena," she said, finally breaking the quiet. "I work at the flower shop back there. Blissful Blooms." Kane nodded slowly. "Kane," he replied. He didn't offer anything else like what he did for a living. He just watched her as if she were a fascinating puzzle. Serena, feeling she needed to fill the silence, kept talking. "I just moved to this part of the city a few months ago. It's not much, but it's mine. Well, it's a rented studio apartment, but it's my little piece of the city." She knew she was rambling, but she couldn't stop. "It was my first day working a full shift alone at the shop today. And it was a disaster. I spilled water everywhere, I probably messed up all the orders, and now this." She gestured to her soaked state. "Not the best start to my new life." Kane listened. He was used to people talking to him, but they usually talked about money or business or trying to impress him. They didn't talk about spilled water and messy first days. They didn't admit to living in tiny apartments. Her honesty was like a splash of cold, clean water. It was refreshing. "Everyone has bad days," he said, and it was the most human thing he had said to her so far. The car eventually turned onto her street, a street lined with older buildings with fire escapes crawling up their sides. "It's that one," Serena said, pointing to a plain, brown brick building. "The one with the blue door." The car came to a stop. She felt a sudden, strange pang of embarrassment. His world was of silent, luxurious cars. Her world was a building with a slightly chipped blue door. "Well," she said, handing the now damp towel back to him. "Thank you again, Kane. You saved me." She reached for the door handle. "Wait," he said. She turned back. He was just looking at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment she thought he was going to say something else, but he didn't. Serena gave him a small, genuine smile. Then she remembered something. She opened her bag, which was surprisingly dry on the inside, and pulled out her wallet. From a small, hidden zipper pocket, she took out a single, perfect, deep red rose. It was a little crumpled from being in her bag all day, but its color was still rich and vibrant, and its scent, now released into the warm air of the car, was sweet and strong. It was her favorite flower from the shop, one she had been saving to brighten her own apartment. She held it out to him. "It's not a fancy towel or a ride in a fancy car," she said softly. "But it's a thank you. For being kind to a stranger in the rain." Kane looked from the rose to her face, his dark eyes showing a flicker of genuine surprise. He slowly reached out and took it, his fingers brushing against hers for the briefest of moments. "Good night, Kane," Serena said. Then she pushed the door open and hurried through the rain, up the 3 short steps and through the blue door, disappearing from view. Kane sat in the silence of his car, holding the single red rose. He looked at the door she had disappeared through, then down at the flower in his hand. He brought it to his nose and inhaled its fragrance. For the first time in a very long time, something inside him, something cold and hard, felt like it had cracked just a little. The car was warm and quiet and safe, but it suddenly felt emptier than it had before she got in. The silence in the car after Serena left was a different kind of silence than before. Before, it had been empty, a quiet space Kane was used to, a buffer between him and the noisy world. Now it felt thick, charged with the ghost of her presence. He could still smell the faint, clean scent of the rain on her coat, mixed with the sudden, overpowering sweetness of the rose. He looked down at his hand, at the single, perfect bloom resting against his palm. It was such a simple thing, a red rose. People gave him expensive bottles of wine, rare artifacts, gifts with price tags that could support a small family. But no one had ever given him a flower. It was a gift that asked for nothing in return, a gesture of pure, simple thanks. He held it carefully as if it were made of glass, all the way back to his penthouse apartment, a place of vast, open spaces and floor-to-ceiling windows that showed off the entire glittering city. He placed the rose in a simple glass of water on the stark, modern kitchen counter. It looked out of place there, a splash of soft, organic life in a world of hard edges and cold steel. For the next 2 days, it was the first thing he looked at in the morning and the last thing he saw at night. He found his thoughts drifting back to the girl in the rain, Serena. He replayed their short conversation in his head. Her honesty about her bad day, her admission of living in a small apartment, her lack of pretense. It was so utterly foreign to him. The women he usually met were like polished stones, smooth and beautiful but all essentially the same, telling him what they thought he wanted to hear, their eyes already calculating the cost of everything in the room including him. Serena's eyes had held no calculation, only a genuine, shivering gratitude. It intrigued him. It nagged at him. On the third morning, looking at the rose which was still stubbornly beautiful, he made a decision. He didn't call an assistant, he didn't look up her address in a file. He simply had his driver take him back to the street with the blue door, and he began to walk. He found Blissful Blooms easily. It was a small shop, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore, its window filled with a cheerful, slightly messy explosion of color. He stood outside for a long moment, watching through the glass. She was there, standing on a small step stool, carefully misting a hanging basket of purple flowers. She was humming a little tune, completely absorbed in her task. She wore a simple green apron, and her hair was tied back, a few loose curls escaping around her face. She looked happy, peaceful. Kane felt a strange, unfamiliar tightening in his chest. He pushed the door open, a little bell jingling softly above him. Serena turned, a ready smile on her face for a customer. The smile froze when she saw him. Her eyes widened in surprise and she almost dropped the water mister. She stepped down from the stool, her hands nervously wiping on her apron. "Kane?" she said, her voice a little breathless. What are you doing here?" He walked further into the shop, the scent of 1,000 different flowers enveloping him. It was overwhelming and wonderful. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, which was a lie so transparent he was almost embarrassed by it. His neighborhood was miles away, a world of skyscrapers and private elevators. He gestured vaguely with the hand that wasn't holding his coat. "I thought I'd stop by." There was an awkward pause. Serena just looked at him, her surprise slowly turning into a quiet wariness. Kane, a man who commanded boardrooms without breaking a sweat, suddenly felt clumsy. "I wanted to thank you for the rose," he added, feeling the need to explain his presence. "It was unexpected." Serena nodded slowly. "You're welcome. It was the least I could do." Another silence fell between them, filled only by the quiet hum of a refrigerator unit full of cut flowers. He could see the questions in her eyes. The suspicion. He was a billionaire who had picked her up in the rain, and now he had tracked her down at her job. He understood how it looked. So he decided to do something he rarely did. He decided to be direct. "Serena," he began, his voice more serious now, "I would like to have dinner with you." He saw the refusal forming on her lips, the shield going up behind her eyes. She took a small breath, ready to let him down gently. But before she could speak, she looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man from the car, yes, the one with the sharp suit and the intense gaze. But she also saw something else, a hint of something in his eyes that wasn't a demand, but almost a request. And it was that small, almost vulnerable flicker that made her change her answer. "Kane," she said, her voice firm but soft. "The women you usually meet, the ones from your world. I'm not like them." She took a step closer, her gaze steady and honest. "I don't know how to play those games. I don't care about your money. I don't want a fancy handbag or jewelry. If you ask me to dinner, you're asking me. The real me. The one who works in a flower shop and lives in a building with a chipped blue door. The one who has messy days and says what she thinks. If you don't want that, if you're just bored or curious, then you should leave right now. Because I won't pretend to be someone I'm not for anyone." She finished, her cheeks slightly flushed, but her chin held high. She had drawn her line in the sand. Kane listened to every word. He had been prepared for a yes or a no, but he hadn't been prepared for this. This raw, unfiltered honesty was like a bucket of cold water, shocking and bracing. It was the most direct anyone had been with him in years. He looked at this brave, slightly trembling young woman who was demanding to be seen for who she was, and he felt a surge of respect so strong it almost winded him. He gave a single, slow nod. "I understand," he said. "And I'm not asking for anyone else. I'm asking for the woman who gave a stranger a rose in the rain. I'm asking for you." The tension in Serena's shoulders eased. A small, real smile touched her lips. "Okay then," she said. "Dinner would be nice." Their first date was not at a 5-star restaurant. He let her choose, and she chose a small, noisy Italian place with red and white checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in old Chianti bottles. They ate heaping plates of spaghetti and meatballs, and Kane, for the first time in his adult life, didn't think once about business or deals. He listened to her talk about growing up in a small town, about her love for flowers and what each one meant, about her dream of one day owning her own little shop, a place just like Blissful Blooms but hers. In return, he found himself telling her things he never talked about. He spoke about starting his company in his college dorm room, about the long, lonely nights building it from nothing, about the pressure of always having to be the strongest, smartest person in the room. He didn't talk about his wealth, he talked about his work, his passion, and the loneliness that had come with his success. They began to see each other regularly. Kane canceled important meetings to walk with her in the park. He discovered the simple joy of eating an ice cream cone on a park bench, watching the world go by. Serena introduced him to a world of small pleasures, the smell of old books in a second-hand shop, the taste of cheap, greasy pizza eaten on the steps of a museum, the simple fun of a silly movie. He laughed with her, real, deep laughter that came from his belly. He held her hand as they walked, and it felt more intimate than any business deal he'd ever closed. He was, for the first time, just Kane. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, just a man falling in love with a woman who saw the man behind the money. And Serena, in turn, saw past the sharp suits and the intense stare. She saw the lonely boy who had built walls around himself, and she saw the good, kind man who was slowly, carefully, starting to let those walls come down. The change in Kane was a subtle but profound one, like a landscape slowly warming after a long winter. The people in his office noticed it first. The sharp, impatient edge in his voice softened. He sometimes paused by a window, not looking at the city as a kingdom to be conquered, but simply watching the clouds drift past. The endless, grinding engine of ambition that had driven him for so long had quieted, replaced by a new, gentler rhythm that beat in time with the moments he spent with Serena. He found himself thinking not about his next acquisition, but about whether Serena preferred daisies or tulips, and the way her nose crinkled slightly when she laughed. His world, once defined by stark blacks and whites, was now flooded with the vibrant colors she brought with her. For Serena, the change was just as deep. The initial wariness, the constant low-level fear that she was living in a beautiful dream from which she would soon wake, began to fade. She saw the real Kane, the man who listened with his whole being when she spoke, the man whose hands, so capable and strong in a boardroom, could be incredibly gentle when helping her repot a fragile orchid. She saw the weight he carried, the loneliness that had been his constant companion, and she felt a fierce, protective love for him. Their time together was a series of shared discoveries. He taught her about fine art in hushed museums, not in a showy way, but by sharing the stories behind the paintings that moved him. She, in turn, taught him the names of all the constellations they could find from the rooftop of her apartment building, her head resting on his shoulder as she traced the shapes in the sky. One evening, a few weeks after their first dinner, Kane picked her up from the flower shop. He had a different kind of energy about him, a quiet excitement. "I have a place I want to show you," he said, his eyes holding a secret light. He didn't take her to a restaurant or a show. Instead, the car drove them up, winding through the hills that overlooked the city until they reached a secluded, grassy bluff. When Serena stepped out of the car, her breath caught in her throat. Spread out below them was the entire city, a breathtaking carpet of twinkling lights that stretched all the way to the dark horizon of the ocean. Up here the air was clean and cool, and the sky was a deep, velvety black, dotted with countless stars. It was utterly private, utterly peaceful, and more beautiful than any five-star restaurant could ever be. He had brought a thick, soft blanket and they sat on it, side by side, not speaking for a long time, just watching the silent, glittering spectacle below. The usual sounds of the city were a distant, faint hum, like the world was whispering a secret just for them. Kane finally broke the silence, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "I've never brought anyone here before," he confessed. "This is my place. The place I come to when the noise down there becomes too much." He looked at her, his face illuminated by the starlight. "But it never felt complete until now. Until you were here to see it with me." Serena's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. She turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's perfect, Kane." He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You've changed everything, Serena," he said, his tone serious, intense. "Before you, my life was a series of transactions. Everything had a price. Everything was a deal. But you gave me a rose. You asked for nothing. You see me. Not my money, not my name. Just me." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a slow, tender gesture that sent a shiver through her entire body. "With you," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion, "I feel like I can finally just be." That was the moment the last of her walls crumbled away. She leaned into him, her head finding its familiar place against his shoulder. "I see you, Kane," she whispered back. "And I love the man I see." The words hung in the air between them, simple and true. He went very still. Then he gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. He looked into her eyes, searching for any doubt, and finding only the same love and trust that was overflowing from his own heart. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his mouth to hers. Their first kiss was not a timid one. It was a culmination, a silent promise. It was full of all the words they had just spoken and all the feelings they had been holding back. It was soft and searching at first, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more passionate, more urgent. It was a kiss that spoke of loneliness ended and a new beginning found. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. The world below them had disappeared. There was only the two of them under the infinite sky. The drive back to his penthouse was quiet, but the silence was now filled with a new, electric understanding. Their hands were clasped tightly together, as if they could communicate everything they were feeling through that single point of contact. When the elevator doors opened directly into his apartment, it felt different to Serena. It was no longer just a beautiful, cold space. It was his home, and he was inviting her into the most private part of it. He led her not on a tour, but straight to the floor-to-ceiling windows, where the city lights created their own galaxy. He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her head. They stood like that for a long time, just breathing together. Then he turned her gently to face him. The look in his eyes was one of pure, unguarded desire and a deep, reverent affection. "Are you sure?" he asked her, his voice husky. This was it. The moment of complete trust. Serena felt a flutter of nervousness, but it was drowned out by a powerful, surging certainty. She looked up at him, her own love and desire shining plainly in her eyes. She reached up and touched his face. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she whispered. What followed was a slow, deliberate unfolding of intimacy. It was not rushed. It was a journey of discovery. His hands, as they carefully, tenderly removed her clothes, were not the hands of a powerful CO, but the hands of a man worshipping something precious. Her hands, as they learned the feel of his skin, the strength of his back, were not timid, but curious and loving. There were no more words, only breaths and sighs and the language of touch. When they finally came together, skin to skin, it was with a profound sense of rightness. For Serena, it was a surrender not of weakness, but of immense strength, a gift of her whole self. For Kane, it was an acceptance of that gift and a returning of it in kind. In the quiet, breathless moments that followed, as they lay tangled together in the dark, Serena turned her head on the pillow to look at him. The city lights cast a soft glow on his face. She traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "Kane," she whispered, her voice soft and full of emotion. "You are my first real love. My first everything." In the dim light, she saw his eyes glisten. He pulled her closer, wrapping himself around her as if she were the most priceless treasure in the world. Her words did not make him feel possessive. They made him feel humbled. They made him feel trusted in a way he had never been trusted before. He knew in that moment that he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of that trust, of protecting this incredible, honest love she had given him. Their bodies were still, but their hearts were beating a frantic, joyful rhythm against each other's chests, a silent promise of forever sealed in the intimacy of the night. The world, for Kane and Serena, had taken on a new and brilliant color in the weeks that followed their night under the stars. The city itself seemed to hum with a happier frequency. For Serena, walking through the gleaming lobby of Kane's building no longer felt intimidating. It felt like coming home because he was there. She left a toothbrush in his bathroom, a spare sweater in his closet. These small, personal invasions of his pristine space delighted him. He loved the evidence of her, the lived-in warmth she brought to the cold marble and glass. Their life settled into a sweet, simple rhythm. They cooked meals together in his vast kitchen, often resulting in more flour on the floor than in the baking dish, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. He would work late, but instead of staying in his office, he would bring his laptop to the sofa where she was reading, just to feel her presence, her feet tucked under his leg. It was a kind of peace, a kind of ordinary happiness, that Kane had not known was possible. He was, for the first time in his life, completely and utterly content. Serena, too, was blooming in this new reality. The initial awe of his world had faded, replaced by a deep-seated joy in their connection. She continued to work at Blissful Blooms not because she had to but because she loved it. It kept her grounded, it was her piece of the real world, a world she was determined not to lose. She knew how different their lives were, but with Kane, those differences felt like trivial details, like the contrast between a wildflower and a rose, both beautiful in their own way. She trusted what they had built. She trusted him. This trust was her armor, but it was also, unknowingly, her greatest vulnerability. She did not see the shadows that lurked at the edges of their sunlit world, the quiet resentments that their happiness had sparked in others. One of those shadows was a woman named Isabel. She had known Kane for years, moving in the same elite social circles. She was beautiful, sharp, and had always considered Kane an eventual prize, a fitting conclusion to her own story of ambition and status. She had watched his relationship with Serena from a distance, first with disbelief, then with a cold, simmering fury. How could he choose that nobody? That girl from a flower shop? Isabel saw Serena's simplicity not as genuineness, but as a lack of sophistication. Her love for Kane not as pure but as a clever strategy. In Isabel's world, everyone played a game and she was certain Serena was just playing a better one than the rest of them. She decided it was time to change the rules. She found her opportunity on a Tuesday afternoon. She knew Serena's schedule, knew she often took her lunch break in a small park near the flower shop. Isabel, dressed in an outfit that cost more than Serena's monthly rent, found her there, sitting alone on a bench, eating a sandwich and reading a book. "Serena?" Isabel said, her voice a smooth, cultured purr. Serena looked up, startled. She recognized Isabel from a charity gala Kane had taken her to a few weeks prior. She had been polite, but Isabel's cool, assessing gaze had made her feel like a bug under a microscope. "Isabel, hello," Serena said, offering a tentative smile. Isabel sat down without being invited, crossing her legs elegantly. "I'm so glad I ran into you," she began, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "I just felt I had to talk to you. Woman to woman." Serena's smile faded, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. "Oh," she said cautiously. Isabel leaned in slightly as if sharing a terrible secret. "I'm worried about you, my dear. I know this whole thing with Kane must feel like a fairy tale." She gestured vaguely, encompassing Serena's simple clothes, her modest lunch. "But you have to understand, Kane, he's a certain kind of man. He gets bored. He goes through these phases." Serena felt the first cold trickle of dread. "Phases?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Isabel gave a sad little sigh. "Yes. He finds a girl who is different, uncomplicated. It's a novelty for him, a distraction from the pressures of his real life. He sweeps them off their feet, makes them feel special." She looked directly at Serena, her eyes hard and pitiless. "But it never lasts. He always goes back to his world. He'll marry someone like me. Someone from his own circle. These flings with ordinary girls, they're just a game to him. And my dear, you are his current game." Each word was like a small, sharp needle piercing Serena's heart. The sandwich in her hand felt like a stone. The sunshine felt cold. The words echoed her deepest, most secret fears, the fears she had silenced with Kane's love, with his promises. "That's not true," Serena managed to say, but her voice was trembling. "He loves me." Isabel's laugh was a soft, cruel sound. "Oh, sweet girl. He might think he does for now. But look at you. Look at your life. Do you really believe you can fit into his world forever? Do you really think a man like Kane, a billionaire, is going to build a future with a flower shop girl? Be realistic. He's playing with you. And when he's done, he'll discard you and move on, just like he did with the others." She stood up, brushing imaginary lint from her expensive skirt. "I'm only telling you this to save you the inevitable heartbreak. Leave with a little dignity before he has to ask you to go." And with that, she walked away, leaving Serena alone on the bench, her world shattered into a million pieces. The poison had been expertly delivered. Isabel's lies wove themselves around Serena's insecurities, feeding on the vast difference between her life and Kane's. The beautiful, ordinary rhythm of their love now seemed like a carefully constructed illusion. His kindness felt like condescension. His love felt like a lie. The trust that had been her armor was now a cage of doubt and pain. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could feel was a devastating, crushing heartbreak. She didn't go back to the flower shop. She went straight to her small studio apartment, the one with the chipped blue door, and she packed a single bag. She cried until she had no tears left, her sobs the only sound in the empty room. She didn't leave a note. What could she say? She simply disappeared, taking a train back to her hometown, believing with her whole broken heart that she was saving herself from a far greater pain later on. That evening, when Kane arrived at the flower shop to pick her up, he found it dark and locked. A cold fist of panic clenched in his chest. He called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. He drove to her apartment, his heart pounding, a dozen terrible scenarios flashing through his mind. He knocked on the blue door, first politely, then frantically. A neighbor finally came out and told him the girl had left hours ago, carrying a bag, looking terribly upset. Kane stood in the hallway stunned. The world, which had been so bright and full of color just hours before, had gone gray and silent. He didn't understand. He replayed their last moments together. Had he said something? Done something? The silence from her was a physical ache, a void where her laughter and her love had been. He used all his resources, his money, his power to try and find her, but she had vanished completely, retreating to a place his world couldn't easily reach. The billionaire who had everything was left with nothing but a cold, empty penthouse and the haunting, lingering scent of roses, a cruel reminder of the love he had, for some inexplicable reason, lost. The weeks that followed Serena's disappearance were a gray, hollow existence for Kane. The magnificent penthouse felt like a gilded cage, every corner echoing with the ghost of her laughter. The scent of her perfume had long since faded from the pillows, but he could still imagine it, a cruel trick his memory played on him. He threw himself into work with a ferocity that frightened his employees, but the deals he closed felt meaningless, the numbers on a screen just empty symbols. The victory he had once craved now tasted like ash. He would stand for hours at the floor-to-ceiling windows, not seeing the glittering city, but seeing only her face, hearing her whisper, "You are my first real love." The memory, once his most treasured possession, was now a source of unending pain. What had he done? What had gone wrong? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. He had his security team, the best money could buy, search for her, but she had vanished into the digital ether, leaving no trace. It was as if she had been a beautiful dream, and he had been rudely awakened to a colder, lonelier reality than he had ever known before. Meanwhile, in a small, quiet town miles away, Serena was living in a similar state of numbness. She had returned to her childhood home, to the comfort of her mother's worried eyes and the familiar, slow pace of a place where everyone knew your name. She helped in her mother's garden, the feel of the soil on her hands a small, grounding comfort. But her heart wasn't in it. The vibrant colors of the flowers seemed muted. She moved through her days like a sleepwalker, going through the motions of life without truly living. She missed him. It was a physical ache, a constant, dull throb in her chest. She replayed Isabel's words over and over in her mind, trying to convince herself she had done the right thing, that she had escaped before the inevitable, more devastating end. But the memory of Kane's love, the look in his eyes when he held her, felt more real, more solid, than any of Isabel's poisonous lies. The doubt was a tiny seed, but it had been planted and it was beginning to grow. The break in the case came from the most unexpected of places. Kane, in a fit of desperate sentimentality, had pressed and framed the single red rose Serena had given him that first night. One of his assistants, a young woman who had always liked Serena's gentle nature, was tasked with carefully dusting the frame. She remembered Serena mentioning once, in passing, the name of her hometown, a place she described as being famous for its annual lavender festival. It was a thread, a fragile one, but it was all Kane had. He didn't send a subordinate. He didn't make a call. He got in his car and he drove. 4 hours he drove away from the skyscrapers, through rolling hills and past small towns, until he found the place. It was just as she had described it, quiet, peaceful, with baskets of flowers hanging from every lamppost. He asked at the local diner, describing the girl with the kind eyes who knew everything about flowers. The waitress nodded knowingly and pointed him to a small, white house on the edge of town, with a sprawling, magnificent garden in the back. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat as he parked the car, its sleek city lines looking alien on the gravel road. He walked around to the back of the house and there she was. She was on her knees in the rich, dark earth, wearing a simple faded sundress and a wide-brimmed straw hat, her hands buried in the soil as she tenderly planted a new seedling. She was so beautiful it stole his breath away. He stood for a moment, just watching her, his love for her swelling until he thought he might drown in it. "Serena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She froze. Her head slowly lifted and she turned. The sight of him standing there in her mother's garden was so shocking she couldn't speak. He looked different. The sharp, powerful billionaire was gone. In his place was a man, just a man, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate hope and a pain that mirrored her own. He took a step forward, then another, not caring that his expensive shoes were sinking into the soft dirt. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice low and intense. "Every day. Every single day." Serena slowly stood up, wiping her dirty hands on her dress, her heart hammering against her ribs. Why did you leave?" he asked, the question a plea. "What did I do? Please, you have to tell me. I've been going out of my mind." The genuine confusion and pain in his voice was the final crack in the dam of her resolve. The tears she had been holding back for weeks finally came, streaming down her face, leaving clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Isabel," she choked out. "She found me. She told me I was just a phase. A game to you. That you get bored with ordinary girls like me and that you would leave me eventually." The words tumbled out, all her fear and heartbreak laid bare. "She said you were just playing with me." Kane listened, his face a storm of emotions, shock, fury, and then a profound, heartbreaking understanding. He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, stopping just in front of her. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just looked into her eyes, making her see the absolute truth in his. "Serena," he said, his voice trembling with the force of his feeling. "Look at me. Do I look like I'm playing a game? Do I look like a man who is bored?" He gestured to himself, to his dirt-stained shoes, to the sheer, undignified desperation of his presence in her garden. "Isabel is a liar. She represents a world I never truly belonged to, a world of emptiness and lies. You." His voice broke. "You are the only real thing that has ever happened to me. You were right that first day at the flower shop. You told me you weren't like the others. And you were so right. You are everything they are not. You are honest and you are kind and you see me. Not my money. Not my name. Me." He finally reached out, his hands gently framing her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You are not a phase, Serena. You are not a game. You are my life. You are my first and my last love. You are my forever." He slowly lowered himself to one knee, right there in the soft, rich soil of the garden. He looked up at her, his love shining in his eyes, clear and true and for everyone to see. "I don't care about our different worlds. You are my whole world. I love you. I love every single thing about you. Come back to me. Build a life with me. Marry me." Serena looked down at him, this powerful, beautiful man kneeling in the dirt for her, offering her his heart with a vulnerability she knew he had never shown anyone else. All of Isabel's lies evaporated, burned away by the sheer, blazing truth of his love. The last of the heartbreak and doubt melted from her heart, replaced by a love so strong, so certain, it felt like it could move mountains. A watery, joyful laugh escaped her lips. She nodded, her tears now tears of pure, unadulterated happiness. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Kane. 1,000 times yes." He stood and pulled her into his arms, crushing her to his chest, burying his face in her hair. He held her as if he would never let her go, and in that moment they both knew he never would. The journey that had begun with a chance meeting on a rainy night had led them through heartbreak and back, only to find their way to a love that was stronger, deeper, and more real for having been tested. Their wedding was not a grand, society event. It was held in that very garden, surrounded by the vibrant, blooming flowers that Serena loved so much. The guests were a mix of a few of Kane's true friends from the city and all of Serena's friends and family from the town. They exchanged their vows under a canopy of twisting lavender and climbing roses, promising to love and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. As Kane kissed his bride, the setting sun casting a golden glow over everything, it was clear that this was not an ending, but the most beautiful beginning. Their love story was a testament to the power of honesty, the strength of true connection, and the promise that forever could indeed be found, even on the rainiest of nights. If you were swept away by the journey of Kane and Serena, from a rainy night to a sun-drenched garden wedding, and you long for more stories where love conquers all, then you have found a home for your heart. Subscribe now and join us as we continue to explore the deepest corners of the human heart, one unforgettable love story at a time. Your next favorite romance is waiting.